Basil laughed softly as he felt slight movement. Olivia couldn't help but smile. What turned out to be the scariest moment of her life almost instantly became the happiest of her life. She honestly didn't know how things could get better than this. She then remembered that there were two others that still didn't know. She looked at Basil with a half smile on her face. So, how are we going to tell Mrs. Judson and Dr. Dawson? Olivia asked. Oh, that's right, I forgot about them. And the question, my dear, isn't how we're going to tell them. It's what they're going to do to us once we tell them. Or better yet, what they're going to do to you. Basil looked at her with a sarcastic look that basically said thanks for the backup. All she did was laugh and kiss his nose before he started to get up, but Basil got to his feet before she could make a slight move and helped her up. Basil, I'm pregnant, not helpless. I know. Just trying to be helpful ahead of time. Olivia smiled and shook her head as they headed to the kitchen where Mrs. Judson and Dawson were. Basil could tell that Olivia was slightly nervous because she was squeezing his hand slightly. He would admit he was nervous too, but he could hide his feelings easily. Before they entered, Basil gave Olivia a quick kiss on the cheek. Mrs. Judson had sat down on the table with Dr. Dawson as they entered the kitchen. Olivia did her best to hide her nerves. Thankfully enough, she did well because neither of them suspected a thing. That was until Basil spoke up. Olivia and I have something to tell you both, he said while trying to hide his nervousness. This caught their attention instantly, while at the same time made him lose it. He figured he might as well say it before his nerves really got the best of him, but before he could say a thing, Olivia took over for him. Basil and I are having a baby. They both stood up, waiting. They both stood there waiting for either of them to say something. Finally, Dr. Dawson spoke up while being as calm as he possibly could. Are you certain? Yes. I figured that's why I was nauseous most of the time for the past couple months. Plus, we felt it move, Olivia stated. When did this happen? Mrs. Judson asked. 2 months ago, when we were captured. I can easily say that Olivia and I weren't really thinking of the consequences when it happened. Well, I can see that, or else this wouldn't have happened. Mr. Basil, for as long as I've known you, I thought you'd be smarter than this. Mrs. Judson, if I may interrupt for one moment, please don't take offense or anything, but don't blame Basil for the whole situation. He never forced me into it. I asked for it, and before he did anything, he asked me if I was sure that I was ready, and I felt like I was. I love him and trust him with my life. So, as said, don't put him entirely at fault, Olivia said finally. Dr. Dawson sighed softly and looked at Basil and Olivia once more. He did notice that they had been acting different for the past 2 months. He knew that Basil had feelings for young Olivia, but he never would have guessed that anything like this would happen. However, anything could happen if you were a life or death situation and you didn't know if you'd ever see the one you love most ever again. He could see in both eyes that, even though it wasn't intentional, that they were willing to accept the responsibilities were awaiting them. Well, as long as you both understand and accept the consequences, and you, Olivia, you do realize that from here on out you need to watch yourself, especially when helping Basil and I. No strenuous activity. In Basil, she can be just as stubborn as you, so you need to watch her extra closely. So this means I don't get to do any of the fun stuff? Olivia asked with a sly grin on her face. My dear, I'm being serious. No harm is going to come upon you or the baby. I take it you are about 2 months along, correct? Yes, and I understand Dr. Dawson. Also, you don't have to worry about me slipping up. Basil is already becoming overprotective. I am not, but he is right, darling. I think it's best. Just until after the baby is born. That you take a break from assisting us. But Basil gave her a look before she could go on. Knowing she wasn't going to win, she sighed. Okay, fine, you win. After Dawson and Mrs. Judson went to bed, she and Basil decided to stay up a while longer, talking about what they were likely to expect during the pregnancy, what they were going to do once the baby was born. Once the clock struck midnight, they finally went to bed. Well, Olivia did anyways. Basil, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. As he was lying in bed, a thought of him becoming a father kept repeating itself in his mind. Every second he grew more and more thrilled. It was past 3 in the morning when the sound of Basil's violin woke Olivia up from her sleep. However, instead of the usual compositions he played, he was improvising. After a few minutes, the melodic sound ceased. Wrapping herself in her own dressing gown, she headed downstairs. She laughed softly as she watched him standing by the fireplace and smiling happily. He actually remembered how his father felt the day that his brothers and sisters were born. He could easily remember the look on his face, pure happiness, even when he himself was born. His father told him that he felt like the luckiest man of all London. Basil specifically remembered his father telling him that when his time came to be a father, it would change his life forever. From that moment, he felt the baby begin to kick. I get it. To when it entered the world. Every little thing would always bring a smile to his face. So far, he was right. The moment Basil felt it move, just like his father, he felt happier than he's ever been. Also, what amazed him the most was that it was Olivia who was the one carrying his child. If I didn't know any better, I think you were in your own little world, Olivia said, startling Basil slightly. Livy, how long have you been standing there? Not long, a few minutes. So what are you thinking? He looked at her and then back to the blazing fire. I was thinking about my father, thinking about all he told me about the day I became a father myself. She smiled as she wrapped her arms around him. Holding him tightly, he gently placed one arm around her shoulders while the other arm barely went around her waist as his hand was placed on her stomach once again. He enjoyed the feeling it gave him knowing that he and Olivia had created life. Basil looked at her before kissing her softly. As he pulled away, he figured now was the right time to tell her what else was on his mind. Olivia, there's something else I've been meaning to ask you about. What? What is it? He guided her to the small blue couch that was sat up against the wall. Both sitting down, Basil took a deep breath before speaking once again. I meant to say this earlier, but with everything that happened today, it slipped my mind. I know you'll probably think that I'm wrong when I say that I don't think I deserve to have you. I don't have much to give you except for true love I have for you. You're the only thing that keeps me going. After everything we've been through, I feel like something was telling me that we were meant to be together. I don't think I could go on with my life without you. I know now that it's you that I want to spend the rest of my life with. With that said, Basil reached into his pocket and pulled out a black velvet box. Olivia realized where he was going with this as she watched him kneel in front of her. Opening the box, her eyes widened. The sight of it was indescribable. He smiled at her as he took her hand. Olivia Elizabeth Flaversham, will you marry me? She was speechless. The one thing she ever wanted, the one thing she practically dreamed about her whole life was really happening. Looking deep into his eyes, she kissed him passionately and finally answered yes. Slipping the ring on her finger, he stood her up as they kissed deeply and just as passionately once more. Well, I have to say that was actually a pretty decent story. I know some of you are probably like, yeah, but isn't Olivia a kid? Well, in this fanfic, she isn't a kid. It's like 10 years later, and I do know that back in those days, it was common for, a girl who was like 16 to 20 to marry a man who was older. So, considering the timeline, considering it's not like she's a teeny little kid in this fanfic is, nothing wrong with it at all. I mean, there was a couple of little grammar mistakes, but other than that, it wasn't that bad of a story. Let's read the author's note at the very end. Okay, so there you have it. I'm not sure, but I think I did make Basil out of character. If I did, sorry about that. I still hope you enjoyed it. As I said before, I wrote this at 4 in the morning. To me, it was worth writing, even though I have to get ready for drill in. Well, now actually, since it's almost 5:30. Anyways, okay, you don't need an S at the end of anyway. Anyway, let me know what you all think. Also, I just noticed that tomorrow is Valentine's Day. This must have been written like in February. So consider this an early B-Day fanfic since I won't be able to upload it later on today because I'll be in Lexington. Isn't being in the Virginia Defense Force fun? Again, R&R. Yeah, so I have to say this was actually a very good story. A lot better than that other Great Mouse Detective fanfic I read a while back. I'm sorry, but Basil and Ratigan do not make sense at all as a couple. They just don't. They just don't. This makes more sense. Although in the movie, Olivia is technically a kid, but seeing this fanfic takes place like 10 years after the movie and she's older, it makes more sense. Although, to be honest with you, it still kind of freaks me up. Only because I know she's supposed to be older in this, but I just picture little kid Olivia. I can't help it. I don't picture it throughout the entire story, but I don't know, when I think of Olivia, I think of, little kid Olivia. But, I mean, this story was pretty good. It was a very good story. I thought the grammar was good. I thought the build-up was great. Great use of paragraph spacings. Only a couple of grammar mistakes. But other than that, it was a very good story. So if you guys are interested in reading more of Basil x Olivia Lover's stories, go right ahead. I believe they have 3 other stories for you to read. Well, I'm the FanFic Critic. I read it, you listen, and I'm going to watch Great Mouse Detective.